My husband threw wine and mocked me. I took revenge and exposed the fraud that got him frozen. At dinner, my husband threw wine on me when I questioned his expenses and said, "This is my money, not yours." By the next morning, I was gone, and so was everything else he owned. That single word, mine, had never held such profound meaning for me until that fateful night. At dinner, I sat there staring at my husband, Marcus, in shock and disbelief as the red wine dripped down my face and onto my silk blouse. The shattered remains of his wineglass lay scattered across the pristine white tablecloth, a jarring contrast to the elegant dinner setting. "This is my money, not yours," he snarled, his handsome face contorted with rage and contempt. "How dare you question my expenses? I'm the one who works hard to provide for this family, while you just sit at home and spend my money." Hey, beautiful people, your support means everything to me. Help me reach my next big milestone by hitting that subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and ensures you never miss an amazing video. Let's dive in. In that moment, something deep inside me shattered irreparably. The illusion of our perfect marriage, the facade of love and partnership that I had so desperately clung to for the past decade. It all crumbled to dust in the face of his cruel words and actions. I had always dreamed of a life of luxury and sophistication. Growing up in a middle-class family, I had worked tirelessly to put myself through college and land a coveted job at a top marketing firm. It was there that I first laid eyes on Marcus, a charismatic and driven young executive who enchanted me with his charm, brilliance, and opulent lifestyle. Within a year of our passionate courtship, Marcus and I were wed in a breathtaking ceremony at a picturesque vineyard. As I recited my vows before our loved ones, I felt like I was living a real-life fairy tale. I was now Olivia Russo, wife of a prosperous businessman and a fixture of the city's elite social scene. For the first few years of our union, life was everything I had ever envisioned. I left my job to embrace the role of a full-time housewife, filling my days with shopping sprees at designer boutiques, lunches with other affluent wives, and throwing lavish dinner parties in our palatial estate. Marcus was attentive and affectionate, surprising me with extravagant presents and whisking me away on luxurious getaways. However, as the years slipped by, hairline fractures began to appear in the immaculate veneer of our marriage. Marcus's controlling nature intensified, dictating every facet of my existence, from my wardrobe choices to my social circle. He insisted that I justify every cent I spent while growing irate if I dared to question his own financial choices. I found myself treading on thin ice, constantly uncertain of what might provoke one of Marcus's explosive tirades. He would disparage my intellect, ridicule my aspirations, and accuse me of ingratitude for the life he provided. To the outside world, he maintained the image of a devoted husband, but in the privacy of our home, his barbed words slowly chipped away at my self-esteem and confidence. Despite my escalating discomfort, I tried to persuade myself that this was merely a temporary rough patch and that things would improve. I loved Marcus deeply and wanted to believe that he reciprocated that love. I threw myself into being the consummate wife, hoping that if I just put in more effort, I could bring him happiness and rekindle the spark of our early days together. But that illusion was irrevocably shattered on that ill-fated evening at dinner. I had invested hours into crafting an exquisite gourmet meal, meticulously selecting the perfect wines and adorning the table with our most elegant china. I had even donned a stunning new dress that Marcus had recently gifted me, a form-fitting black number that accentuated my curves in all the right places. As we took our seats to dine, I hesitantly broached the topic of our finances. I had noticed some unsettling discrepancies in our accounts and hoped to have a collaborative discussion with Marcus to find a resolution. But before I could even articulate my concerns, Marcus's visage contorted with unbridled rage. He slammed his wineglass down on the table with such force that it shattered, sending jagged shards flying in every direction. I sat frozen, my body paralyzed with shock, as Marcus rose to his feet and loomed over me menacingly, his eyes smoldering with fury. In that suspended moment, as the wine slowly dried on my skin, leaving behind a tacky residue, a painful realization crystallized within me. This was far from the first time Marcus had demeaned me, exerted control over me, or made me feel like I was nothing without him. But I knew with unshakable certainty that it would be the last. That night, as I lay awake beside my snoring husband, the weight of my realization settled heavily upon me. The sting of Marcus's betrayal, The humiliation of his public outburst and the years of emotional abuse I had endured crashed over me in relentless waves. But amidst the pain and despair, a flicker of determination ignited within my soul. I couldn't continue living this way, a prisoner in my own home, a shadow of the vibrant, ambitious woman I had once been. Marcus's cruelty and control had slowly eroded my sense of self, but I refused to let him extinguish my spirit entirely. In the quiet darkness of our bedroom, I made a silent vow to myself. I would break free from this toxic marriage and reclaim my life, no matter the cost. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into planning my escape with meticulous attention to detail. During the day, I maintained the facade of the perfect housewife, attending social events on Marcus's arm and managing our household with practiced efficiency. But in the stolen moments when he was away at work or asleep, I began to quietly gather the resources I would need to start a new life. I secretly opened a personal bank account and began siphoning small amounts of money from our joint accounts, careful not to arouse Marcus's suspicion. I scoured our financial records, making copies of important documents that detailed his business dealings and investments. I even reached out to an old friend from college, a brilliant lawyer named Sophia, who agreed to help me navigate the legal complexities of divorce and asset division. As I pieced together my plan, I couldn't help but reflect on the years I had wasted in the sham of a marriage. I had been so young and naive when I met Marcus, dazzled by his charm and the promise of a life of luxury. I had willingly given up my own career and independence, believing that being his wife would bring me ultimate fulfillment. But now, with painful clarity, I saw the truth. Marcus had never viewed me as an equal partner, but rather as a possession to be controlled and manipulated. The realization fueled my determination to break free. I knew that leaving Marcus wouldn't be easy. He was a powerful man with vast resources and a vindictive streak a mile wide, but I also knew that I had to try, for the sake of my own sanity and self-respect. I refused to spend another day living in fear, walking on eggshells, and suppressing my own needs and desires to appease his fragile ego. As the weeks turned into months, I continued to lay the groundwork for my escape. I quietly sold off some of my designer clothing and jewelry, funneling the proceeds into my secret account. I made copies of all our important documents, birth certificates, social security cards, passports, and stashed them in a safety deposit box that Marcus knew nothing about. And I began to discreetly reach out to friends and acquaintances, carefully gauging who I could trust to support me when the time came. Through it all, I was acutely aware of the risk I was taking. If Marcus discovered my plans, I had no doubt that he would make me pay dearly. He had always been fiercely possessive and quick to anger, and the thought of me leaving him would be the ultimate blow to his pride. I knew that I would have to be exceptionally careful, covering my tracks and maintaining an air of absolute normalcy until the moment I was ready to make my move. But even as I wrestled with fear and uncertainty, I found a new sense of purpose and strength growing within me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was taking control of my own destiny, rather than simply existing as an extension of Marcus's will. The knowledge that I was working toward a brighter future, free from his manipulation and abuse, gave me the courage to keep pushing forward, even in the darkest moments. Finally, after months of careful planning and preparation, the day arrived when I would make my escape. I had chosen a time when I knew Marcus would be away on a business trip, giving me a crucial window of opportunity to set my plan into motion. With trembling hands, I packed a single suitcase with the bare essentials, a few changes of clothes, my most treasured possessions, and the documents I had so carefully gathered. I took one last look around the luxurious home that had been both my palace and my prison, feeling a twinge of sadness for the love and dreams I had once believed in, but I knew that staying would be a far greater tragedy than leaving behind the trappings of wealth and status. As I stepped out into the cool, crisp dawn, a sense of exhilaration and fear coursed through my veins. I slipped into the waiting taxi, my heart pounding as I gave the driver the address of the modest apartment I had secretly rented across town. It was a far cry from the sprawling mansion I was leaving behind, but it represented something far more precious: freedom. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt and uncertainty. Was I doing the right thing? Would I be able to build a new life on my own without the financial security and social status that Marcus provided? But even as the doubts swirled in my mind, I clung to the memory of that fateful night at dinner, the night when Marcus's true colors had been laid bare for all to see. I knew that I deserved better than a life of constant fear and belittlement. I deserved to be treated with respect, to have my own dreams and ambitions, to be seen as a whole person rather than a mere accessory to someone else's success, and I was determined to fight for that life, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. As the city skyline faded into the distance behind me, I felt a sense of bittersweet liberation wash over me. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my identity and my future. There would be challenges and setbacks ahead, but for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope and excitement for what lay ahead. I was no longer Olivia Russo, the trophy wife and silent sufferer. I was Olivia, the survivor, the fighter, the woman who had dared to dream of a life beyond the gilded cage. And I knew that whatever happened next, I would face it with my head held high and my spirit unbroken. The betrayal had cut me deeply, but it had also awakened a strength and resilience I never knew I possessed. And as I embarked on this new chapter of my life, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not only survive, but thrive, and I would make Marcus rue the day he ever underestimated me. As the taxi carried me away from the life I had known for so long, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through my veins. I clutched my small suitcase close to my chest, my hands trembling slightly as I realized the magnitude of what I had just done. I had left behind everything, my home, my possessions, and my marriage, in pursuit of a chance at freedom and happiness. The first few days in my new apartment were a whirlwind of emotions. I felt a sense of relief and liberation knowing that I was finally free from Marcus's controlling grip. But at the same time, I was acutely aware of the challenges that lay ahead. I had to rebuild my life from scratch, without the financial security and social status that I had grown accustomed to. I threw myself into the task with determination and focus. I found a job at a small marketing firm, drawing on the skills and experience I had gained in my previous career. It was a far cry from the high-powered position I had once held, but it provided a steady income and a sense of purpose. I began to make new friends, slowly building a support network of people who knew me as Olivia, the independent woman, rather than Olivia, the wealthy housewife. But even as I began to build a new life for myself, I couldn't shake the lingering shadows of my past. I was haunted by memories of Marcus's cruelty and the years I had spent under his thumb. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing and my skin damp with sweat, as vivid nightmares replayed the worst moments of our marriage in my mind. I knew that I needed help to heal from the trauma I had experienced. I started seeing a therapist, a kind and compassionate woman named Dr. Patel, who helped me work through my feelings of fear, anger, and shame. She taught me coping strategies for managing my anxiety and encouraged me to rebuild my self-esteem through positive affirmations and self-care. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel a sense of hope and renewal. I was no longer defined by my relationship with Marcus or the life I had left behind. I was forging my own path, one step at a time, and discovering a strength and resilience within myself that I never knew I possessed. But even as I began to heal and move forward, I couldn't shake the nagging sense of unfinished business. I knew that Marcus would not let me go easily, and I feared the day when he would inevitably track me down and try to drag me back into his world. That day came sooner than I had anticipated. I was leaving my apartment one morning, ready to head to work, when I saw a familiar figure leaning against a sleek black car parked across the street. My heart stopped as I recognized Marcus's tall frame and chiseled features, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. I froze, my mind racing with panic and dread. How had he found me? What did he want? I considered turning around and running back inside, but I knew that would only delay the inevitable confrontation. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked toward him with a sense of determination. As I approached, Marcus pushed himself off the car and removed his sunglasses, fixing me with a piercing stare. "Olivia," he said, his voice low and controlled. "It's time to come home." I shook my head, my voice trembling slightly as I replied, "I'm not going anywhere with you, Marcus. This is my home now." He took a step toward me, his expression darkening. "Don't be foolish, Olivia. You belong with me. I've given you everything. A life of luxury, a place in society. You can't just walk away from that." I felt a surge of anger and defiance rising within me. "You gave me a gilded cage, Marcus, a life of fear and control. I won't go back to that. Not ever." He scoffed, his lips curling into a sneer. "You think you can make it on your own? You're nothing without me, Olivia. You'll come crawling back soon enough, begging for my forgiveness." I stood my ground, my voice steady and clear. "I'm not nothing, Marcus. I am a survivor. I am a woman who has learned her own worth, and I will never again let anyone else define me. You have no power over me anymore." For a moment, I saw a flicker of surprise and uncertainty in his eyes, but then his expression hardened, and he took another step toward me, his hand reaching out to grab my arm. I reacted instinctively, my training from the self-defense classes I had been taking kicking in. I twisted out of his grip and delivered a sharp elbow to his solar plexus, causing him to double over in pain. I used his momentary distraction to sprint toward the safety of my apartment building, my heart pounding in my ears. As I reached the front door, I heard Marcus's enraged shout behind me. "This isn't over, Olivia. You can't hide from me forever." I didn't look back as I raced up the stairs to my apartment, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. Once inside, I collapsed against the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps as the adrenaline drained from my body. I knew that Marcus's words held a kernel of truth. He was a powerful man with vast resources at his disposal, and he would not rest until he had exacted his revenge upon me. But in that moment, I also knew that I had something far more valuable than wealth or status. I had my freedom, my self-respect, and my unbreakable spirit. As I sat there on the floor of my tiny apartment, tears streaming down my face, I made a silent vow to myself. I would not let Marcus's betrayal define me or dictate the course of my life. I would rise above the pain and the fear, and I would build a future on my own terms. It would not be an easy road, but I knew that I had the strength and the determination to see it through. I had already taken the first steps toward reclaiming my identity and my autonomy, and I would not rest until I had achieved the life I truly deserved. With a deep breath, I pushed myself to my feet and wiped away my tears. The battle was far from over, but I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. I was Olivia, the survivor, the fighter, the woman who had dared to break free from the chains of betrayal and forge her own path to retribution. Marcus's unexpected appearance outside my apartment served as a chilling reminder that my past was never far behind. Despite my brave words and newfound resolve, I knew that I would never truly be free until I confronted the demons that still haunted me, and the greatest of those demons was the man I had once called my husband. In the days following our confrontation, I threw myself into my work and my new life with a sense of determined focus. I refused to let Marcus's threats and intimidation tactics derail the progress I had made. I continued to attend therapy sessions with Dr. Patel, working through the complex emotions that his reappearance had stirred up within me. But even as I tried to move forward, I couldn't shake the nagging sense of unease that followed me like a shadow. I found myself looking over my shoulder constantly, jumping at every unexpected sound or movement. I knew that Marcus was out there somewhere, plotting his next move, and the anticipation of what he might do next was almost as terrifying as the reality. As the weeks passed, I began to hear whispers and rumors about Marcus's increasingly erratic behavior. Friends and acquaintances would pull me aside at social events, their voices low and conspiratorial as they shared the latest gossip. Some said that he had become a recluse, rarely leaving his sprawling mansion and refusing all visitors. Others claimed that he had been spotted out on the town, drinking heavily and picking fights with anyone who crossed his path. I tried to distance myself from the rumors, focusing instead on building my own life and career. But a part of me couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction at the thought of Marcus spiraling out of control. After all the years of abuse and manipulation I had suffered at his hands, there was a dark corner of my heart that relished the idea of him getting a taste of his own medicine. But even as I tried to push those thoughts aside, I couldn't escape the growing sense of dread that lingered in the back of my mind. I knew that Marcus's unraveling was a ticking time bomb, and I feared the moment when he would finally explode. That moment came on a chilly October evening as I was walking home from work. I had taken to varying my route and schedule, never wanting to be too predictable in my movements. But as I turned the corner onto my street, I froze in my tracks at the sight of a familiar figure stumbling toward me. It was Marcus, but not the polished, carefully controlled Marcus I had known for so long. His hair was disheveled, his clothes rumpled and stained. He reeked of alcohol and cigarettes, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused as he staggered in my direction. For a moment, I was tempted to turn and run, to put as much distance between us as possible. but something inside me snapped, a long, simmering rage that had been building for years. I stood my ground, my fists clenched at my sides, as Marcus lurched to a stop in front of me. "Olivia," he slurred, his voice thick with alcohol and resentment. "You think you can just walk away from me, from everything we had together?" I stared at him, my voice icy as I replied, "We had nothing together, Marcus. Nothing but lies and abuse and control. I'm done being your victim." He let out a harsh bark of laughter, his eyes glinting with a manic light. "You'll never be done with me, Olivia. You're mine now and forever. And if I can't have you, no one can." With those words, he lunged at me, his hands outstretched like claws. But I was ready for him. I sidestepped his clumsy attack and delivered a swift kick to his kneecap, sending him sprawling to the ground with a howl of pain. I stood over him, my chest heaving with a mix of adrenaline and long-suppressed rage. "You don't own me, Marcus. You never did. And I will never, ever let you control me again." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a blend of hatred and grudging respect. "You think you've won, Olivia? You think you can just walk away and live happily ever after? You have no idea what I'm capable of." I shook my head, a mirthless smile playing across my lips. "That's where you're wrong, Marcus. I know exactly what you're capable of, but I also know what I'm capable of, and I will fight you with every breath in my body, every step of the way." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him sprawled on the cold concrete. I could hear him shouting after me, his voice rising in a crescendo of rage and desperation, but I didn't look back. In the days that followed, I braced myself for Marcus's next move. I knew that he wouldn't let my defiance go unanswered, and I was prepared for anything he might throw my way. I doubled down on my self-defense training, honing my skills until I felt confident in my ability to protect myself. I reached out to Sophia, my lawyer friend, and began the process of filing for a restraining order and divorce. But even as I took all the necessary precautions, I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was always one step ahead of me. I would catch glimpses of him out of the corner of my eye, lurking in the shadows or watching me from a distance. I received anonymous threats and menacing messages, each one a chilling reminder of the power he still held over my life. And then, just when I thought I had reached my breaking point, I received a call from Sophia that changed everything. She'd been digging into Marcus's financial records and business dealings, looking for any evidence of wrongdoing that could give me leverage in the divorce proceedings. And what she had uncovered was beyond anything I could have imagined. Marcus, it turned out, had been involved in a web of illegal activities for years, from money laundering to insider trading to outright fraud. He had been using his wealth and influence to manipulate the system, lining his pockets at the expense of others. And now, thanks to Sophia's tireless efforts, we had the proof we needed to bring him down. As I listened to Sophia lay out the details of the case, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction wash over me. Finally, after all the years of suffering and betrayal, I had the upper hand. I had the power to make Marcus pay for his crimes, to see him face the consequences of his actions. But even as I reveled in the prospect of justice, I knew that the road ahead would not be easy. Marcus would not go down without a fight, and I would have to be prepared for every dirty trick and underhanded tactic he might employ. But I was ready. I had been forged in the fires of betrayal and survival, and I would not rest until I had claimed the retribution I so richly deserved. Armed with the evidence of Marcus's illicit activities, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination. I knew that I had the power to bring him to justice, to make him pay for all the pain and suffering he had inflicted upon me and countless others. But I also knew that the road ahead would be treacherous, and I would need every ounce of strength and cunning I possessed to see it through. In the weeks that followed, I worked closely with Sophia to build our case against Marcus. We pored over financial records, interviewed witnesses, and gathered a mountain of incriminating evidence. It was tedious, exhausting work, but I threw myself into it with a sense of grim satisfaction. Every piece of the puzzle we uncovered brought me one step closer to my ultimate goal, seeing Marcus brought to his knees. As we prepared to take our case to the authorities, I couldn't help but reflect on the long, painful journey that had led me to this moment. I thought back to the naive, trusting young woman I had been when I first met Marcus, so easily dazzled by his charm and wealth. I remembered the slow, insidious way he had chipped away at my self-esteem and independence until I barely recognized the hollow shell I had become. But I also thought of the strength and resilience I had discovered within myself in the aftermath of my escape. I had been broken, but I had not been defeated. I had clawed my way back from the brink, one painful step at a time, and emerged stronger and more determined than ever before. And now I was ready to use that strength to take on the man who had once been my greatest weakness. The day of reckoning arrived on a crisp, clear morning in early spring. Sophia and I walked into the federal courthouse, our heads held high and our evidence clutched tightly in our hands. We were met by a team of FBI agents and federal prosecutors who listened intently as we laid out the details of Marcus's crimes. I watched with a mix of amazement and pride as Sophia presented our case, her voice ringing out with clarity and conviction. She painted a damning picture of Marcus's illegal activities, from the shell companies he had used to launder money to the insider trading schemes he had orchestrated. She laid bare the depth of his corruption and greed, leaving no room for doubt or equivocation. As the hours ticked by, I could see the expressions on the faces of the agents and prosecutors shifting, from skepticism to shock to grim determination. They asked pointed questions and demanded further evidence, but Sophia and I were ready with answers and proof at every turn. By the time we finally emerged from the courthouse, the sun was setting over the city skyline. I felt bone-deep exhaustion, but also a sense of profound relief and satisfaction. We had done it. We had taken the first step toward bringing Marcus to justice, and there was no turning back now. In the days and weeks that followed, the case against Marcus quickly gained momentum. The FBI launched a full-scale investigation into his business dealings, uncovering even more evidence of fraud and corruption. The media caught wind of the story, and soon Marcus's face was plastered across every newspaper and television screen in the country. I watched from a distance as his empire began to crumble piece by piece. His assets were frozen, his businesses shuttered, his reputation left in tatters. He was arrested and charged with a laundry list of crimes, from racketeering to money laundering to tax evasion. Through it all, I stayed out of the spotlight, refusing to give interviews or comment on the case. I knew that this was Marcus's downfall, not mine, and I had no desire to revel in his misery. I had fought too hard and come too far to let him steal the spotlight one last time. But even as I watched him fall, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still one final piece of the puzzle missing. I had brought Marcus to justice, but I had not yet found true closure for myself. I knew that I needed to confront him one last time, to look him in the eye and tell him that he no longer held any power over me. And so, on a chilly autumn evening, I found myself standing outside the federal prison where Marcus was being held, awaiting trial. I had pulled every string and called in every favor to arrange this meeting, knowing that it would be my last chance to face my demon head-on. As I was led through the maze of concrete and steel, my heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. I had no idea what I would say to Marcus when I saw him, no idea how he would react to my presence. But I knew that I needed this moment, needed to see for myself that he was just a man, flesh and blood and bone, no longer the towering figure of my nightmares. And then there he was, sitting across from me in a stark, barren visitation room. He looked older, thinner, his once proud bearing replaced by a haunted, hunted look, but his eyes still glinted with that familiar mix of cunning and malice, even behind the thick pane of bulletproof glass. For a long moment we simply stared at each other, the weight of our shared history hanging heavy in the air between us. And then, to my surprise, Marcus spoke first. "Olivia," he said, his voice rough and ragged, "I have to admit I never thought I'd see you again, not like this." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "I needed to see you, Marcus. I needed to tell you that I forgive you." His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in suspicion. "Forgive me? For what?" "For everything," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "For the manipulation, the abuse, for making me believe that I was nothing without you. But most of all, for underestimating me. You thought you could break me, but you were wrong. I am stronger than you ever gave me credit for, and I am done letting you control my life." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. And then, to my shock, he began to laugh. It was a harsh, bitter sound, devoid of any real mirth. "Oh, Olivia," he said, shaking his head, "you always were a clever one. But you're wrong about one thing. I never underestimated you. I knew exactly how strong you were. That's why I had to break you, because I knew that if I didn't, you would be the one to break me." I felt a chill run down my spine at his words. but I refused to let him see my fear. "Well, congratulations," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You succeeded. You broke me, but you also underestimated my ability to put myself back together. And now I am whole again, and you're nothing." I stood up then, my legs shaking but my head held high. "Goodbye, Marcus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I hope you rot in here for a long, long time." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving behind the man who had once been my whole world. I knew that I would never forget the pain he had caused me, the scars he had left on my soul. But I also knew that I was finally free from his control, his manipulation, his cruelty. As I stepped out into the crisp autumn air, I felt a sense of lightness and liberation wash over me. I had faced my demon and emerged victorious. I had claimed my retribution, not through violence or vengeance, but through the power of my own inner strength. And now, as I looked out at the wide, open world before me, I knew that anything was possible. I had survived the unimaginable, and I had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that I had the power to overcome anything. The betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but in the end, it had also set me free. And for that, in some strange, twisted way, I would always be grateful. As I walked out of the prison, leaving behind the man who had once held such power over me, I felt a sense of profound relief and liberation wash over me. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders, a burden I had carried for far too long. In the weeks and months that followed, with Marcus behind bars and his assets seized, I was finally able to move forward without the constant fear of his retribution hanging over my head. I found a new apartment in a vibrant, up-and-coming neighborhood, far from the suffocating opulence of the mansion I had once shared with Marcus. I filled it with bright, airy furnishings and personal touches, creating a space that felt truly my own. I threw myself into my work, taking on new clients and projects with a sense of passion and purpose. I had always been good at what I did, but now, free from Marcus's constant belittlement and control, I found that I was thriving like never before. My colleagues and clients noticed the change in me, commenting on my newfound confidence and creativity. In my free time, I reconnected with old friends and made new ones, building a support system of strong, independent women who understood the challenges I had faced. We would meet for coffee or drinks, swapping stories and offering each other encouragement and advice. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen and understood. I also continued my therapy sessions with Dr. Patel, working through the lingering trauma and trust issues that Marcus's abuse had left me with. It wasn't always easy, confronting the painful memories and deep-seated fears that had haunted me for so long. But with each session, I felt myself growing stronger, more resilient, more whole. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my sense of self, my confidence, my trust in my own judgment. I learned to set boundaries and assert myself, to stand up for what I believed in and what I deserved. I learned to love myself again, to see my own worth and value independent of anyone else's validation or approval. As the months turned into years, I found myself thriving in ways I had never thought possible. My business was booming, my friendships were deep and meaningful, and my sense of self was stronger than ever. I had not only survived my ordeal, but had emerged from it a better, stronger, more authentic version of myself. Of course, there were still moments when the old fears and doubts would creep in, when I would find myself looking over my shoulder or jumping at sudden noises. The scars of my past would never fully fade, and I had accepted that they were now a part of who I was. But I refused to let those scars define me or hold me back. I had fought too hard and come too far to let the ghosts of my past dictate my future. And so, I kept moving forward, one step at a time, determined to live my life on my own terms and to never again let anyone else control my destiny. As I sat in my cozy living room one evening, sipping a glass of wine and reflecting on how far I had come, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude. I had been through hell, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I ever thought possible. I thought back to the naive, trusting young woman I had been when I first met Marcus, so easily dazzled by his charm and wealth. I thought of the years I had spent under his thumb, slowly losing myself piece by piece until I barely recognized my own reflection in the mirror. But I also thought of the strength and courage I had found within myself when I finally decided to break free, to reclaim my life and my identity. I thought of the long, difficult journey I had undertaken, from those first terrifying steps out of our marital home to the final confrontation with Marcus in that cold, sterile prison visitation room. And I realized that, in the end, my story was not one of victimhood or defeat, but of survival and triumph. I had faced the darkest parts of myself in the cruelest of circumstances and had emerged victorious. I felt a sense of peace and contentment settle over me. I had reclaimed my life, my freedom, and my sense of self, and nothing and no one could ever take that away from me again. In the end, my story was not just one of betrayal and retribution, but of hope, healing, and the unshakable power of the human spirit. And as I looked out at the wide open world before me, I knew that I was ready to embrace whatever new adventures and challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that I had the strength to face anything. The sun had just begun to set over the city skyline, casting a warm, golden glow over everything it touched. I watched as the colors shifted and changed, painting the world in shades of orange, pink, and purple. It was a breathtaking sight, a reminder of the beauty and wonder that still existed in the world, despite all the darkness and pain. And as I sat there, basking in the warmth of the fading light, I felt a sense of deep, unshakable gratitude wash over me. Gratitude for the strength and resilience that had carried me through the darkest of times. Gratitude for the friends and loved ones who had stood by me and supported me every step of the way. Gratitude for the hard-won wisdom and self-awareness that I had gained through my struggles. I knew that my journey was far from over, that there would be new challenges and obstacles to face in the years to come. But I also knew that I was ready for whatever lay ahead, armed with the strength, courage, and unshakable belief in myself that I had fought so hard to earn. And so, as the last rays of the setting sun dipped below the horizon, I raised my glass once more in a silent toast, to myself, to the woman I had become, and to all the possibilities that lay ahead. I had survived the unimaginable, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. The betrayal had nearly broken me, but in the end, it had also set me free, and for that, in some strange, twisted way, I would always be grateful, because it had shown me the depths of my own strength, the unshakable power of my own spirit. And with that knowledge, I knew that I could face anything that life threw my way. I was a survivor, a warrior, a woman who had claimed her own destiny, and nothing and no one could ever take that away from me again. As the golden glow of sunset faded into the cool, velvety blue of evening, I found myself reflecting on the long, winding road that had brought me to this moment. It had been a journey filled with pain and heartache, with betrayal and loss, but also with incredible growth, resilience, and self-discovery. Looking back, it was hard to recognize the woman I had once been, the naive, trusting girl who had fallen so easily under Marcus's spell, who had been so willing to sacrifice her own dreams and identity for the sake of a man who never truly loved her. That girl had been shattered beyond recognition, broken by years of emotional abuse, manipulation, and control. But from the shards of that broken self, a new woman had emerged, a woman who was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before, a woman who had looked into the face of her deepest fears and darkest demons and had emerged victorious, with a sense of self and purpose that could never again be shaken. It had not been an easy journey, and there had been moments when I had nearly lost myself along the way. The pain of Marcus's betrayal, the humiliation of his public downfall, the long, lonely nights spent grappling with the wreckage of my former life. There had been times when it all felt like too much to bear. But through it all, I had held on to the one thing that Marcus could never take from me, my own inner strength, my unshakable sense of self, and bit by bit, day by day, I had clawed my way back from the abyss, rebuilding my life and my identity from the ground up. I had found solace in the support of friends and loved ones, in the quiet moments of introspection and self-reflection, in the small, everyday victories that reminded me of my own resilience and courage, and slowly but surely I had begun to heal, to rediscover the joy and purpose that had once seemed lost forever. Now, as I stood at the threshold of a new chapter in my life, I felt a sense of excitement and possibility thrumming through my veins. I had faced the worst that life could throw at me, and had emerged stronger, more alive, and more authentically myself than ever before. I knew that there would still be challenges ahead, that the scars of my past would never fully fade, but I also knew that I had the tools and the strength to face whatever lay ahead, to build a life that was truly my own, on my own terms. And so, as the last light of day slipped beneath the horizon, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, savoring the cool, crisp air and the sense of peace and contentment that washed over me. I had walked through the flames of hell and emerged reborn, a phoenix rising from the ashes of my own destruction. I had claimed my retribution not through violence or vengeance, but through the quiet, unshakable power of my own spirit. I had looked my darkest demons in the eye and refused to blink, refused to back down or surrender. And now, as I stood on the cusp of a new dawn, I knew that I was ready for whatever lay ahead. I had the strength, the courage, and the unshakable belief in myself that would carry me through any storm, any challenge, any obstacle that life could throw my way. I was no longer the frightened, broken girl I had once been, but a woman of substance and strength, a force to be reckoned with in my own right. And with that knowledge, I stepped forward into the unknown, ready to embrace the future with open arms and an open heart. As I moved through the days and weeks that followed, I could feel the shift in my own energy, the sense of lightness and liberation that came with finally shedding the last vestiges of my old life. I threw myself into my work with a newfound sense of passion and purpose, pouring my heart and soul into every project and client, determined to make my mark on the world in my own unique way. I surrounded myself with people who lifted me up and inspired me, who challenged me to be my best self and to never settle for less than I deserved. I nurtured my friendships and relationships with a sense of openness and vulnerability that I had never allowed myself before, letting others see the real me, flaws and all. And in the quiet moments, when the old fears and doubts would sometimes creep back in, I would take a deep breath and remind myself of how far I had come, of the battles I had fought and won, of the unshakable strength and resilience that lived within me. I knew that my story was far from over, that there would be new chapters to write and new adventures to embark upon, but I also knew that I was ready for whatever lay ahead, that I had the tools and the wisdom and the courage to face any challenge that came my way. And so, as I looked out at the wide, open world before me, I felt a sense of excitement and possibility that I had never known before. I was no longer a prisoner of my own fears, my own limitations, but a woman who was truly free to live, to love, and to dream on her own terms. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy me had instead become the catalyst for my own transformation, the fire that had forged me into the woman I was always meant to be. And for that, in the end, I could only be grateful. Grateful for the strength and resilience that had carried me through the darkest of times, grateful for the love and support of the people who had stood by me every step of the way, grateful for the hard-won wisdom and self-awareness that had come through the pain and struggle. And most of all, grateful for the woman I had become, a woman who knew her own worth, her own power, her own limitless potential, a woman who had claimed her retribution, her freedom, and her own story, a woman who was ready to face the world with her head held high, secure in the knowledge that she could handle anything that came her way. And as I took my first steps into this new chapter of my life, I could feel the warmth of the sun on my face, the gentle breeze at my back, the sense of endless possibility stretching out before me. I knew that the road ahead would not always be easy, that there would be challenges and obstacles to overcome. But I also knew that I had the strength, the courage, and the unshakable belief in myself to face whatever lay ahead. I had survived the unimaginable, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more alive than ever before. And with that knowledge, I stepped forward into the unknown, ready to embrace the future with open arms and an open heart, ready to write the next chapter of my own story on my own terms. The betrayal was behind me, the retribution claimed, and now the rest of my life stretched out before me, a blank page waiting to be filled with the story of the woman I had become. As I stepped into this new chapter of my life, I could feel a sense of excitement and possibility thrumming through my veins. The betrayal and pain of my past were behind me, and the future stretched out before me like a blank canvas, waiting to be painted with the colors of my own dreams and desires. In the weeks and months that followed, I threw myself into the task of rebuilding my life with a newfound sense of purpose and determination. I poured my heart and soul into my work, taking on new challenges and projects that pushed me to grow and evolve in ways I never had before. I nurtured my friendships and relationships with a sense of openness and vulnerability that I had never allowed myself before, letting others see the real me, flaws and all. I surrounded myself with people who lifted me up and inspired me, who challenged me to be my best self and to never settle for less than I deserved, and in the quiet moments when I found myself reflecting on the long, winding road that had brought me to this point, I could feel a deep sense of gratitude and appreciation for all that I had been through. Every struggle, every setback, every moment of pain and heartache had shaped me into the woman I was today, a woman who was stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I ever could have imagined. But even as I embraced this new chapter of my life with open arms, I knew that there was still one piece of unfinished business that I needed to attend to, and that was the matter of the man who had once been the center of my world, the man who had betrayed me so deeply and so completely that it had nearly destroyed me, Marcus. Even now, after all this time, the mere thought of his name was enough to send a shiver down my spine. He had been the puppet master behind the scenes of my own personal hell, the one who had pulled the strings and watched with sadistic glee as I danced to his twisted tune. And now, with the gift of distance and perspective, I could see just how deeply his influence had infected every aspect of my life, the way I dressed, the way I spoke, the way I moved through the world. All of it had been shaped and molded by his expectations, his demands, his desires. But I was no longer that woman, the woman who had been so desperate for his approval, so willing to sacrifice her own happiness and well-being for the sake of his ego. I had fought too hard and come too far to ever let myself be controlled like that again. And so, as I sat in the quiet of my new home, surrounded by the warmth and love of the people who truly cared for me, I made a decision. I would confront Marcus one last time, not with anger or bitterness, but with the calm, unshakable strength of a woman who knew her own worth. I would look him in the eye and tell him that he no longer held any power over me, that I was no longer the frightened, broken girl he had once known. I would thank him for the lessons he had taught me, painful as they were, and then I would let him go once and for all. It was a moment that I had been both dreading and anticipating for longer than I cared to admit, but I knew that it was a necessary step on my journey toward true healing and liberation. I needed to face the demons of my past head-on, to stare them down and watch them crumble to dust in the light of my own unshakable strength. And so, on a crisp, clear morning in early autumn, I found myself standing outside the towering gates of the prison where Marcus was being held. The leaves on the trees were just beginning to turn, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson, and I could feel the cool, clean air filling my lungs with every breath. As I stepped through the metal detectors and made my way down the long, echoing hallways, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my palms slick with sweat, but I refused to let the fear take hold, refused to let it shake the foundation of calm, unshakable strength that I had worked so hard to build. And then there he was, the man who had once been my everything, sitting across from me in a drab gray jumpsuit, his once powerful frame diminished by the harsh fluorescent lights and the weight of his own sins. For a long moment we simply stared at each other, the silence stretching out between us like an endless chasm. And then, to my surprise, he spoke first, his voice rough and ragged with disuse. "Olivia," he said, his eyes searching mine with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. "I didn't expect to see you here." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the words that I had rehearsed so many times in my mind. "I needed to see you, Marcus," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I needed to tell you that I forgive you." His eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment I could see a flicker of the old Marcus, the charming, charismatic man who had swept me off my feet so many years ago. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by a hollow, haunted expression that I had never seen before. "Forgive me?" he echoed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "After everything I've done to you, how could you possibly forgive me?" I smiled then, a sad, knowing smile that spoke of the long, hard journey that had brought me to this moment. "Because I understand now," I said softly. "I understand that your cruelty, your manipulation, your abuse, it was never really about me. It was about your own fear, your own insecurity, your own desperate need for control." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine as if looking for some hidden catch, some ulterior motive. But there was none, only the calm, unshakable truth of a woman who had finally found her own strength. "I spent so many years blaming myself," I continued, my voice growing stronger with every word, "thinking that if I could just be better, smarter, more beautiful, more obedient, then maybe you would love me the way I deserve to be loved. But I see now that that was never going to happen. not because of any flaw or failing on my part, but because of the darkness that lived inside of you." He flinched at that, as if my words had struck a nerve that he had long tried to bury. But I pressed on, determined to say what needed to be said once and for all. "I forgive you, Marcus," I said again, my voice ringing out clear and true in the stillness of the prison visitation room. "Not because you deserve it, but because I do. I forgive you for the sake of my own peace, my own healing, my own liberation, and I thank you for the lessons you've taught me. Lessons about strength, about resilience, about the unshakable power of my own spirit." And with those words, I could feel the last of the chains that had once bound me to him falling away, the last of the wounds that he had inflicted finally beginning to heal. I had confronted my demon head-on, and I had emerged victorious, not through anger or vengeance, but through the quiet, unshakable strength of a woman who knew her own worth. As I stood to leave, I could see the tears glistening in Marcus's eyes, tears of regret, of shame, of a pain that I could only imagine. But I felt no pity for him, no lingering sense of attachment or obligation. He had made his choices, and now he would have to live with the consequences. And as for me, I had a whole new life waiting for me on the other side of those prison gates. A life filled with love, with joy, with the endless possibility of a woman who had finally claimed her own power. The betrayal was behind me, the retribution claimed, and now the rest of my story was mine to write, on my own terms, in my own words. With a final nod of farewell, I turned and walked away, my head held high and my heart filled with the unshakable certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The sun was shining, the world was waiting, and I was ready to embrace the future with open arms and an open heart, ready to live the life that I had always dreamed of but never dared to imagine could be mine. And as I stepped out into the bright, beautiful day, I could feel the warmth of the sun on my face,